Shirley Jackson always had an association with large houses. According to Ruth Franklin, the author of Jackson's comprehensive biography, houses were one of her lifetime obsessions and the gravitational centre of much of her fiction. Her grandfather was an architect, and his father, and his father. One of them built houses only for millionaires in California and were the most opulent residences in San Francisco had seen and were known as millionaires' palaces. That was until the Great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 levelled most of them. Franklin also describes the closest Jackson ever came to a supernatural experience was when the writer and her husband were travelling to New York City by train. Before arriving at Grand Central Station, Jackson was shocked by the sight of the most hideous building she had ever seen. It was just a normal rental tenement apartment type house, but she felt a deep horror emanating from it. As the train was leaving the station, Jackson turned around to look at the building again, but it had disappeared, as if it had never been there. When researching for Hill House, Jackson started to ask questions to a wide range of people about ghosts. The resulting data was that most people had never seen one, even though they had a feeling that they may run into a spirit if they went into a dark place or awaking suddenly in the middle of the night. Jackson started collecting vintage postcards and news clippings of old houses while scouting old properties when driving around her local area in Bennington, Vermont. What stuck out was the notorious Winchester House from California and the Everett Mansion in Bennington, but in the end, Jackson created her Hill House out of a combination of all. The architectural imagination of Hill House is one that is faulty. Doors that don't swing and are off-centre, walls and corridors that look longer from one direction yet shorter when returning. Some rooms have no windows, lines and angles do not meet where they should, and if they did, they could only be viewed one particular way. The house was wrong, with no humanity. And this leads us to the most famous opening lines in the book. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Hill House reflects the personalities of all those who inhabit it, and then responds to their past. Eleanor, the protagonist of the story, is invited by a Dr. Montague, an anthropologist who is investigating psychic disturbances of a house that is known to be haunted. She is amongst a short list of successful candidates who have a history of being involved with abnormal events. Eleanor's event was just after her father died when she was 12, a shower of stones falling on the family house for 3 days. And by the way, her older sister is named Carrie. Sound familiar? Eleanor has come to the house bringing heavy psychological baggage due to caring for her invalid mother for most of her adult life. That was until recently when she thankfully passed away. Unfortunately for Eleanor, though, she ends up living with her controlling married sister whom she despises, until one day she escapes in the half-inherited vehicle which her sister forbids her to use coming to Hill House. Theodora, who is also on the list, is an empath. She is everything Eleanor would probably like to be, artistic and bohemian and possibly gay, although the novel never specifies this. They are joined by Dr. Montague and Luke Sanderson, the heir to the estate, whose aunt is the owner of Hill House, and as a condition requires a family member to be present. The house is cursed with a history of family tragedies involving a carriage overturning in the driveway, killing the owner's first wife, and leaving him to raise 2 little girls, who then grow up fighting over who would inherit the house. One of the sisters die, leaving the other, who lives with a girl from the village, who ends up getting the house, but then gets hounded by the sister until she commits suicide from the turret in the tower. The supernatural occurrences start to manifest on the second night. Eleanor awakening, thinking it's her mother knocking on the wall, wanting her help. But it is a presence, banging on all the bedroom doors, searching for who knows what. The closeness of Eleanor and Theodora are apparent right from the start, where they are almost like sisters. You get the sense Eleanor would like to take things further with Theo, but Eleanor eventually kills off the relationship when her very needy and quite disturbed personality traits start floating to the surface midway through the story. And just when you think you are reading a pedestrian and mildly scary novel about a haunted house, Jackson always unsettles the reader with literary jump scares. The narrative takes sharp turns. If you have expectations of how the story should progress, you will soon realise that anything can happen. Incidents in the house begin to escalate when blame turns into extreme paranoia, especially the red paint. Or is it blood writing on the wall? Confusing the reader yet again with another of Jackson's narrative shifts. Keep in mind, Jackson wrote Hill House in 1959, so you may be expecting a typical haunted house story. It is, and it isn't. Think more psychological torment. If you have come to this book from watching the excellent Netflix series based vaguely on it, and without knowing anything about Shirley Jackson's work or when the book was written, you may be disappointed. In fact, I highly recommend reading the book first. Now, if you ever think about what a typical writer's life should be, for example, working in solitude so in order to work, or keeping a relaxed and irregular schedule, which includes spending a lot of time in cafes and living alone in an attic apartment, surrounded by disintegrating second-hand books and always being invited to parties as that writer. Well, nothing could have been further from the truth of Shirley Jackson's short life. After reading her biography, A Haunted Life by Ruth Franklin, I could only admire and respect how this author and mother of four juggled a busy house and, according to her biographer, a difficult and very demanding husband, all contributing to Jackson's cycles of anxiety. It's Hill House's temporary tenants who are producing the manifestations by reflecting their anxieties. Eleanor, with her guilt over her mother's death, failing to respond to her knocking on the wall, as Hill House's doors are pounded on at night by ghostly children. And Eleanor's fear of a future alone, when awakening one night thinking she was holding Theodora's hand in bed beside her, only to discover it was someone else, as Theodora is sleeping across the room in another bed. Most of the supernatural happenings in the book are confusing and don't seem to have any meaning or connections. If you are one of those readers that require an explanation, be prepared, for like the building itself, Hill House has many dead ends. Even though there are chilling elements to the story, at its core, Hill House is a psychological thriller with a slow, subtle descent into madness. A good comparison would be Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher. And like the Netflix series, each character is singled out, with the house acting out each of their inner demons. Jackson writes, "This house, which seemed somehow to have formed itself, flying together into its own powerful pattern under the hands of its builders, fitting itself into its own construction of lines and angles, reared its head back against the sky without concession to humanity. It was a house without kindness, never meant to be lived in, not a fit place for people or for love or for hope. exorcism cannot alter the countenance of a house. Hill House would stay as it was until it was destroyed. Shirley Jackson went on to write her final and, in my opinion, best work, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. By the way, the house you are seeing was filmed by myself when my son and I visited Ripponlea Estate in Melbourne, Australia, where some scenes for the film Winchester were shot. If you like this review, a thumbs up is always appreciated, and you can always subscribe for more. Until next time, stay safe.